Hi guys, and welcome back to the Scale Model Shed YouTube channel, and in this video I'm going to be building this lovely Morane Saulnier MS.230 by Dora Wings. This is a simple little kit with only 3 main sprues and some nice detail. The MS.230 had a top parasol type wing, and it's a good choice if you want to build this era of aircraft but don't want to have to deal with a full biplane. So I hope you enjoy the build. Please give the video a like and let me know what you think in the comments. Comments really help boost the video's exposure, and if you haven't already, it would be great to have you on board by subscribing to the channel. And before we start, a quick shout out to Abby and Alloys for distributing Dora Wings in the UK. And as usual, you can purchase all the kits and modelling supplies you'll ever need by visiting scalemodelshed.co.uk. So for me, this is going to be a very clean build with minimal weathering. I start off by priming the cockpit floor in grey. I then spray it with Tamiya wooden deck tan as a foundation layer to create wood grain effect. And this wood effect is created using raw umber and buff oils. The floor is first wettened with enamel thinners before streaking small amounts of raw umber oil. More precise grain effect is then created. But this is really all experimental, as you can just keep going until you've created the desired effect. Adding some of the buff oil creates another dimension to the wood grain. And these two oils can be carefully flowed together to create some quite intricate patterns. Once it's finished and it's had a day to dry, I give it a sealing coat of matte varnish. Most of the other cockpit components are painted silver and the decals are applied. These are then glued onto the base using super glue. Moving on to the engine, and the push rods are glued into position. These are left until they've dried solidly into position before I go ahead and clean up where they've been removed from the sprues. I use black primer as the base colour for the engine before dry brushing with AK Extreme Metal Steel. The exhaust is solid plastic, so I first create a pilot hole and then drill this out with as thin a wall as I dare. After painting in copper and then very lightly applying pale burnt metal, I use black pigment to finalise the effect on the exhaust. I fix the pigment using pigment fixer by applying it to the edges and allowing it to flow through the pigment. Moving on to the fuselage, and first the sprue connection points are carefully removed. The inside of the two halves are then primed in black before being sprayed with AK Extreme Metal aluminium. Once the cockpit was glued into position, I found it necessary to tightly tape the two halves of the fuselage together. I don't think I had the cockpit in the wrong position, but it seemed like it was slightly too wide, preventing the two sides of the fuselage to easily come together. Once glued, it was left until the next day to remove the tape. The seam was scraped with a knife blade. This removes any lip or discrepancy in height between the two halves. The seam line needed filling all the way round, and for this I used Vallejo plastic putty. The needle applicator allows you to precisely apply the filler. This reduces the amount of sanding needed and in turn the amount of damage this would cause either side of the seam. I start sanding using a medium 6 to 800 grade sanding pad. In the event that the seam cleans up easily, using a finer grade sanding pad will cause the least damage. As you can see here, we have a slight step on the seam, so I apply more emphasis to the sanding of the higher side until it comes into line. And as you can see here, watching what the filler's doing makes it obvious when you need to stop. The area is then buffed back up to the same point as the surrounding plastic. I remove the moulded tank straps as later on in the build I'm going to make my own. I then prepare to paint by carefully masking the cockpit with foam. Once primed, you can really see the detail. You can also very easily see any areas that need extra work. And yeah, I didn't do a very good job on that seam, did I? The difficulty with this area is those ribs down the back, and you don't want to lose that detail. Spraying 3 to 4 coats of Mr. Surfacer 500 on these areas will usually do the trick. Surfacer 500 is a very thick filler primer, and as you spray it on you're building up the area evenly, leaving the surrounding detail untouched. And as you can see here, you can still see the seam, but you would do as you're building the whole area up equally. But it doesn't take much to take the top off and lose any unwanted detail. And once done, I use a soft 2000 pad just to smooth off any of the overspray. Now I don't know if I'm missing something, but I couldn't find the suggested green for this aircraft in the instructions. So I chose this Nakajima green, which is a pretty good match to the aircraft I'm referencing. Now I plan to use metal foil for the bare aluminium sections of this model, so I can start by just painting the whole thing green. And I'm not going to worry about any post shading or pre-shading, just nice and clean. Once dry, I give the whole model a coat of gloss varnish. And there's a couple of reasons this is useful, but I'll go over that in a bit. I usually soak my decals in warm water for about 10 seconds, and then remove them and put them to one side to loosen off the backing paper. I put a drop of microcet onto the model and then apply the decal over the top. This particular decal hasn't got much detail to conform to, so I soak a cotton bud in microsol and use it to press the decal down. I find this presses it down firmer and reduces the risk of the decal slipping. Before giving the model a final coat of varnish, it's worth checking for any imperfections. This fibre would have remained visible in the final varnish layer, so I carefully sanded the top off. And I'm not sure what this was, but as you can see, when flattened off it showed through as white. And this isn't a problem, the area was touched up and will become invisible when the final varnish layer is applied. Now you can't really see here, but I could see a faint ghost seam down the underside of the model. And this is another good use for a gloss varnish layer, as any minor imperfection can usually be flattened out in the gloss coat without disturbing the paint underneath. I then give the whole model a coat of VMS satin varnish. And this is just the best varnish I've ever used. You don't need to thin it, you need about a 0.4 needle in your airbrush and about 30 psi. And if it's not quite spraying right, just up the pressure. Spray it on nice and wet, but don't allow it to run. Leave it to sit for about 5 minutes and the finish is just phenomenal every time. Last bit of paint required on the fuselage is the copper fuel tank on the underside. And I think it's testament to the VMS varnish that I'm happy to mask over the top of the decals. So next we're going to move on to the front end and the bare metal foil. And I'm using the matte aluminium version, and this is a self-adhesive real metal foil that you stick directly onto the model. I'm going to break this down into smaller sections, and I'm going to start with the section across the top of the fuselage and around the cockpit. Using a new blade, I cut a piece that's larger than the area that I wish to cover. The foil is positioned, then I carefully start to burnish it down with a cotton bud, making sure to eliminate any creases as I go. The foil is easily formed over any detail and into panel lines. However, it will show up any imperfections, so you have to ensure that your model was impeccably clean underneath before applying the foil. So I'm using a fibrous type cotton bud or Q-tip and not a wooden one. So cutting the end off at an angle gives you a soft but firm tool to work the foil. Still being careful as the foil is fairly easily torn. Once I was happy with the foil, I took about an 800 grade sanding pad. I then used this to flat down and smooth out the surface texture of the foil. I found that polishing the metal with some wax gave a fantastic final finish. And finally, some extra rivet detail was applied using a rosy riveter. Some AK True Metal was used on the underside copper tank, and True Metal is a buffable wax based paint. My initial plan was to paint on the Belgian roundels on the top and bottom wing surfaces. But after cutting a piece of aura mask and trying it in position, I found that due to a combination of the double curvature and the ribbing, it was almost impossible to maintain a perfect circle with the mask. And I could foresee any inaccuracies of the circle would be compounded as they got smaller. So I scrapped this idea, gave the wing a coat of gloss varnish and proceeded to use the decals. Trying to lay the decal down on the top of the wing was not very easy, and it just confirmed my issues with the double curvature. It's like trying to wrap a flat piece of paper around a globe. You're going to end up with creases. In an attempt to soften the decal enough to minimise any creasing, I resorted to using Ultimate Modelling Products' extra strong decal setting solution. But it didn't matter how hard I tried, I couldn't completely eradicate the folds. And here I had a choice. I could either leave them and they might disappear underneath the final varnish coat, or I could try and sort them out and use it as an exercise to repair decals. So that's what I did, and I carefully flatted the decal with a 6000 Trizact pad. And luckily it was only the red part of the roundel that was affected. I mixed the correct colour and repaired the decal using Abtielung oils. Oils are ideal for this because they don't dry quickly and are easily blended to a very smooth finish. The instructions call for the model to be silver under the wings with black letters and numbers. But my model is green with white lettering, meaning I needed to use the decals as a template and create stencils to spray these on. The roundels on the flatter underside of the wing went on without a problem, so the whole wing was given a coat of satin varnish. Now onto the bit I've been dreading, and this is the framework underneath the centre of the wing. And the instructions tell you to first fit that framework in mid-air, followed by the main wing supports and then the undercarriage. And then just like that, pop the top wing on. Now bearing in mind I have to use super glue on all these supports because, like an idiot, I've used bare metal foil on the fuselage. So I decided to glue the side wing supports in first, using number C24 here to gauge the correct position of the fuselage to ensure they are glued at the correct angle. And these are glued with regular plastic cement and left to dry nice and solidly overnight. In a much more leisurely fashion, I can then glue the supports to the fuselage with super glue. I found it easier to leave all the centre supports on the sprue to paint. These can then be glued into place one at a time using slow setting super glue. Any necessary touching up of the under wing struts was done using Mr. Metal Colour Chrome Silver. Some minor staining was applied to the metal using sepia oil. Where applied, this gave the aluminium a slight golden tint. I made some masks for the wheel covers before spraying the tyres in Tamiya rubber black. The only real weathering to this model is simply some dust. After dustying the wheels up, I thought it best to tie in this weathering on the underside of the model. The propeller is going to be gloss black with an aluminium leading edge, and for this Mr. Surfacer Black is used as the base colour. And finally I used some dust colour oil paint to just slightly change the tone of the control surfaces. And when I felt the effect had gone slightly too far, I used some green oil to tone it down. So that's it for this one guys. Please give the video a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel and remember to check out the website at scalemodelshed.co.uk. So once again, thank you so much for watching, happy modelling everyone, and see you next time.